The way we mix music is changing. Every day, more and more producers are discovering techniques that speed up their workflow and make their music sound radio ready right from their bedroom. But if you're ever wondering why your mix doesn't quite sound like it's at that professional level, you're in the right place. Today, I'm going to show you 7 mixing techniques that you can apply to your tracks right now. And these are techniques that I use on every single mix. They're easy to apply and they'll work no matter what level you're at. So stick around because these tips will help you save time, prevent common mistakes, and help you level up your sound. So let's dive in. Tip number 1, the kick and bass relationship. The kick and bass are the glue that holds your mix together, and getting them to actually gel is really crucial for a tight and punchy low end. Here are 2 of my favorite techniques: sidechaining the bass to the kick. Plugins like Kickstart 2 are affordable and make this really easy to do. You can also do it with your compressor, say inside Ableton, and use the sidechain function to link them up. I'm recommending Kickstart 2 here because if you have this or something like LFO Tool even, it's the easiest to apply. You can go subtle with this or really lean into it and get a very deep pumping effect that you'll find in genres like future bass or some EDM genres, but it all depends on the vibe you're going for. If you want something a little more subtle that works in pop and even some acoustic genres just to make that bass sit and gel, I'd recommend technique number 2, which is using EQ to carve out that space. Now, while natural EQ works really well here, I highly recommend using dynamic EQ on a plugin like Pro Q3. When set up correctly, dynamic EQ reduces the frequencies from that kick within the bass, and it does so automatically. You'll be able to see the kick data come through on the bass's EQ, and you can notch that out with dynamic EQ, which will automatically bring that particular frequency down depending on the threshold that you set. I highly recommend using one of those 2 to clean up the kick and bass relationship. And as a bonus tip, use something like a saturator in parallel to the kick or bass, just to give it that extra bit of drive to not only mesh with the kick, but also bring up some of those upper harmonics on smaller speakers. Tip number 2, referencing tracks. There's no need to guess when you have a track reference. In order to reference your track successfully, I recommend having a song in the same key, tempo, and genre. Turn off your mastering plugins aside from maybe EQ and compression, level match to the reference, and compare them. I usually like to reference a track using this process. I start with the kick, clap, percussions, bass, and then fill out the rest according to where you landed and by comparing it to the reference. It's really important to listen to how certain elements are panned and how they balance certain elements. For example, where is the vocal sitting both volume and pan-wise compared to where the guitar's sitting? Tools like Reference 2 are great for this, and honestly, this practice alone will take your mixes to the next level. So tip number 3, arrangement. A solid arrangement saves you from overmixing. Keep your kick, snare, vocals, and bass in the center, and use panning for width with percussive elements like hi-hats, synths, guitars, and so on. The most important thing to take away from arrangement is to choose complementary sounds. Make sure that if you're choosing something that has a great low end and you don't necessarily need the upper mids or the high end in that sound, maybe replace it with another element or let something else in the mix take up that frequency. It's all about space, layering, and how you place things that will save you so much time mixing in the long run. Tip number 4, use sends. Sends are essential to add depth and dynamics to your mix. There are 3 core ways that I use sends, and these are 3 sends that I think you should have set up in your template ready to go. Firstly, parallel compression to add depth and power to your drums and vocals, room reverb for certain elements to give you that width and space, and then creative effects like longer reverbs and delays, particularly for your vocals. And you're probably wondering why use a send rather than putting the plugin directly on the track. Sends allow you to blend effects without over-processing the track. Use those 3 core sends and lock them into your template. You'll find that your mixes turn out a lot cleaner. Tip number 5, gain staging. To me at least, gain staging is non-negotiable. I typically start by ensuring nothing's peaking or hitting the red and ensuring I have enough headroom for my mix bus. Make sure to check your meters to make sure there's enough headroom and nothing's going into the red, but also don't forget to check instruments like Serum or the Ableton drum sampler. So often synths like Serum, the presets come very hot, so you really have to watch that and make sure none of the sounds are going into the red. Gain staging allows your mixes to breathe and sound clear and full. Tip number 6, mix bus processing. I see a lot of newer producers ignoring the mix bus completely. And while there's a lot aside from the mix bus that has to be dialed in, careful mix bus processing can absolutely change the game. To get started, I recommend an EQ, cleaning up any of the muddy frequencies, and of course using the very powerful mid-side EQ. And with mid-side EQ, you can take out all of the low end from the sides of the mixes to keep it nice and focused in the middle. Building on that, to get started with a basic processing chain for your mix bus, I recommend something like this: subtractive EQ, compression, Pultec EQ, mostly for boosting and attenuating the low end, saturation or color, and then limiting. For the beginning of that chain, I'll typically high pass at around that 18 Hz mark, just to get rid of any of that unnecessary low end rumble. We want to focus on small, subtle moves here, because overall, this will make the biggest difference. Now, tip number 7 is mastering your EQ. Most producers don't typically use EQ to its its full capabilities, along with compression, which are two fundamental techniques, but we're going to focus on EQ for now. EQ is a secret weapon, and if you learn these three techniques, you'll know exactly how to use it. Firstly, subtract before you add. Fix the problem frequencies where possible, then shape the sound as needed. Use dynamic EQ to help things pop in the mix. For example, using dynamic EQ in the upward direction acts like a transient designer for that particular frequency, something that's great for boosting the fundamental on kicks and snares. And number 3, use EQ creatively. Use it as a high-pass filter, a low-pass filter, automate those filters in and out of sections. Use it as a creative tool. Boost frequencies, take them out, and shape the sound in an unconventional way to add depth to your mix. For example, if you have an ad-lib vocal that you want to sit further back in the mix, play around with the high-pass filter, adding a notch right at the cutoff frequency, and you can even try the same with a high pass. Remember that EQ is just volume controlled by the frequency. When you master it, you control the entire shape of your mix. And now for a few bonus tips. Use automation for tension and release. For example, you might lower the volume of your master bus by about 1.5 and then automate it back up to 0 for when the chorus hits. Be as consistent as possible. Even 20 minutes a day making music and practicing production can make a massive difference, and it's better than no practice at all. If you found these tips helpful, I'll leave a link to the cheat sheet below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and drop a comment if you found this helpful.